Okay, Itamek Sistiko, good day. It is a cool 3 degree above zero Saturday near afternoon, September 22nd, 2018, in the lunar cycle Awaka Sikitsum, the deer moon. And just decided to stop by out here, Spopikimi, make a little video about something I was reminded of this morning. I'm always surprised at the turtles out here. This is off topic. This is just a tangent because I'm standing here looking at turtles with their, their heads surfacing. You're not going to see them in the camera, most likely, because I'd need a telephoto lens to show you. But there's turtles coming up in the water here, and it's 3 degrees. It's pretty cold. I feel like wearing gloves. It's so cold. Still in my bare legs and sandals though. Anyway, yeah, I woke up this morning and I was going through my normal morning routine, my everyday thing, which is, get out of bed, take care of a little hygiene, go downstairs, make some coffee. While the coffee's brewing, go around the house and tend to my zoo, put some food out for all the dogs, feed the birds, give everybody fresh water, give worms to my indoor magpies, beetle grubs to them. It's their morning breakfast thing. And take a little bit of food offering outside for the other corvids. Then I sit down with my laptop and my coffee, and I look at YouTube and Facebook and what communications I might have in terms of people's comments on my videos or comments on my posts and this kind of thing, and I try to go through and respond at least with like in the comments so people know that I read it, but because I do read them all. But then certain comments I might actually say something to. It might be a question or something that I need to answer. So anyway, and then once I've looked at that stuff, then I write a little journal piece for my salubrious indulgence game, scoring up my health points that I earned in different domains the previous day. And then I always title that little journal entry with a date in my own notes that I keep at home. And when I wrote September 22nd at the top of my page today, I thought, isn't September 22nd important for something? I couldn't retrieve its importance, just like that. I had to sit there and think. But I'm proud at least to say that, when I saw that date, I knew something happened on that date, that the date was important. And turns out, it's important for a couple of reasons. One thing that everybody can relate to, perhaps, is that this is the equinox, right? This is the fall equinox. I wonder how much effect the equinox in fall has on the animals as compared to the spring equinox, because I know the spring equinox, and especially the full moon after that equinox, triggers a lot of stuff. Very importantly for us, the waterfowl start laying their eggs. So that's the big celebration of Easter, which has many forms around the northern hemisphere, including the opening of the beaver bundle as it's formed here in Blackfoot territory. So some mallards just did their tricky entry. So the equinox is one layer of importance to this date. But I knew there was something else. And it took me just a couple of seconds, then it hit me. Oh yeah, this is the date that Treaty 7 was signed. Treaty 7 is the treaty between Canada, or the British Crown, really the British Crown. Blackfoot made treaty up here with the British Crown and, and the Blackfeet, right? So, 1877, September 22nd, 1877, Treaty 7 was signed. And I feel like it's weird that this isn't a publicly recognized holiday to be celebrated, because Treaty 7 is the political agreement that allows for non-Blackfoot people to live in this area. You'd think you'd treat it like a regional version of Canada Day or the 4th of July. This is celebrating, this political space coming into the form that it has right now. In fact, it's weird to me that both the United States and Canada, why aren't the treaty areas, why don't they define the boundaries of the states / provinces / territories of the nation? Because those are the agreements that allow for non-Indigenous to live in those areas, right? And it would just make more sense in terms of the natural geography, because all of those, the tribe's political areas are defined by the watersheds, by a geographic feature, the watersheds, rather than arbitrary lines, latitudes and this and that. So yeah, I felt, this morning, like, man, it's a shame that I know a lot of people are going to wake up and September 22nd isn't going to mean anything as a date to them. A lot of people here in this area. And, the treaty's not ancient. We're talking 141 years ago is when this was done up. It should be a guiding kind of piece of not legislation, but it's a treaty. It's a guiding agreement to how we're living today, and it should actually be renegotiated. Now that everybody speaks English and can understand each other, because the Blackfoot understanding of what was going on at those negotiations and what the agreements were is very different from the typical kind of Canadian understanding of that. And by the way, the Canadian Blackfeet here signed treaties with the United States as well, right? So we got treaties going on both sides of that border, which should be celebrated. The other one was the Rainbow Treaty of 1855. That one I don't know the Gregorian date other than the year off the top of my head. But yeah, so I think they're more important than we're treating them, these treaties. And I would like to advocate, as part of what Canada is calling reconciliation, the recognition of these treaties, and it should be part of our primary education again, should be part of the regular round of annual public ceremonies and recognitions, And we should know, everybody should know kind of the history of that treaty and both sides, what they had in mind when they went into it, what they both understood from it. Because it does really need to be brought up to date and renegotiated now that everybody's got the same language. Like I say, Blackfoot did not understand what the British Canadians were putting forth in that. From the Blackfoot perspective, treaty is inestisen. Inestisen means like a agreement to live in mutual respect. That word, that part, that respectful part of it, ennakip. One way I can explain what I mean there is to, by analogy, say you have a water barrel and you're using that barrel to catch 100% of your drinking water. That's your drinking water source, that rain barrel. And so you've got to make sure that every time it rains, you're replenishing the water in that barrel. So you got to drink just enough of that water that when the rains come, you'll be able to put a lot of fresh rain in there. But you don't want to drink it so fast that you run out of water before the next rain, because that's your only source, right? You have to make sure no contaminants get in that bucket. You're going to want to maintain that bucket, If something is breaking, you're going to want to fix it, or you're going to want to get a new bucket made before the thing breaks to the point of being a problem, right? So all of these things you have to take into consideration, because your welfare depends on that bucket. So in that case, in the Blackfoot sense of the language, you have a respect for that bucket, ennakip, you respect it. But it's more than what's typically associated with the English word respect, because there is that dependency built into it, that understanding that we coexist, and we're important to each other. Our welfare is connected to the other's welfare, right? This is also the language that I use with the rattlesnake program, Ennakotsiop. We have that mutual respect and coexistence. So treaty, inestisen, that's the root concept that's in there, is to coexist in respect, okay? In respect, because our welfares are connected. And what was really how was that relationship defined? Why was that, what was the form of that interdependency? That I'd have to take you back to the beaver bundle origin, because that was the original treaty, and every other treaty that Blackfoot tribes have made since then were kind of modeled after what happened with the origins of the beaver bundle. And I don't want to go through the whole big story. I think I've put it out there elsewhere before, but let's just say that the beaver bundle is the very start, the first part of what would become the Blackfoot, spiritual and knowledge complex. It's very old. It came in at the introduction of the first domestic dogs. So it might be 10,000 years old, the beaver bundle. And it is the treaty, the physical embodiment of the treaty between human beings and the other species in what's Blackfoot territory, the upper Saskatchewan and upper Missouri drainage basins. And the story of its origin is highly symbolic. There's a lot of symbolism that plays into the story. But what it basically comes down to is there's a conflict between human beings who were fairly new in the region at the time the story takes place, and the animals who had lived there much longer. It's a conflict between them. There was a threat that human beings could extinguish a lot of life around there needlessly. And the story focuses around a man who's a really highly skilled expert trapper and hide curer who's doing just that, you know. And what ends up happening is the man's wife, the trapper's wife, gets stolen by the beavers, leaving her infant son in the lurch and in threat of dying. And in turn, the trapper steals the beaver's favorite pup, a little albino beaver pup. And he holds it ransom, not just for his wife to be returned, but for other things to occur that were dictated to him in kind of dream visitations by a spirit. And so a negotiation occurs where the beaver come with all of their allies, which is all the other species that are dependent on them, which is a lot because a beaver is a keystone species. They go to negotiate, sit and negotiate with the human. They bring his wife back. They give him a bundle. They give him a bundle that is a physical embodiment of a treaty that they made between themselves and some of the predator animals that might otherwise kill them often, like the wolves and coyotes and eagles and bears and wild cats. The beavers made a treaty with them at one time, and so they had a bundle that represented that treaty. It was made up of the skins of those predators, but that also included songs and things that the predators had given to the beavers. So they gave that to the man, and they gave his wife back, and they wanted the pup, and the man refused. This guy's name was Matoyapi, Whitegrass. He refused. And at that point, an otter, Emmonitsi, river otters, addressed the other animals and said, the nerve of this human being. Mani toya, they only just arrived. And he has demands he's putting on us. Why should we entertain his demands? This guy, he might be able to run some distance, but he's not fast. He's not fast. And that's his best skill. You look at the other things that he's got, he can't hardly climb trees, he can't swim worth a darn, he can't fly at all. He's soft, he's slow, he's weak. Why should we take demands from this guy? We could easily overpower him, us animals. Let's just gang up on him and eat him and be done with this. And the animals were all considering it, because they could, you know. They had it well within their power to overtake one man. And they still do. And they don't need a whole bunch of them they have it within their power to overtake us in a lot of circumstances, even smaller animals, you know. But they don't. And the reason they don't, according to the story, is the old man beaver, he told the animals, yeah, we could do that. We could gang up and eat this man. Wouldn't be hard. But when you do something like that, it always gets found out. You can't hide something like that. It's going to get found out one way or another. And the other human beings are going to learn of what we did. And then anytime they see us, they're just going to want to kill us because they're going to feel threatened by us. So if that's the future we want, then yeah, we could eat this guy. But, you know, the beaver's telling the other animals, that's not what I brought you here for. I brought you here because, you know, I'm asking for your help to get my grandchild back. But the grandchild, of course, stands for the future generations, you know, and the benefit of the future generations, their welfare. Same as the human infant boy that's put in jeopardy. Those are the future generations. So the beaver says, you know, I brought you all here to help me secure that future. So what we're going to do, those of you who are willing to help, add to this bundle that we're giving this man. Teach him things that he can share with the other humans that are going to help them be able to find foods, find medicines, build shelters, protect themselves from dangers, raise their children and families, you know. All of these things that we have learned here, how to live well here, let's share them with the humans, and they'll live well here too, you know. And in turn, when they see us, rather than being afraid of us, they're going to have respect for us, because they're going to know that we gave them their way of life. They're not just going to want to kill us all the time for nothing, you know. So that was the agreement. Okay, and all the animals start chipping into the bundle, leaving their robes. So the bundle is physically, tangibly, a collection of those hides of the contributing animals and stuff. But the meat of it comes in the songs and the dances, where the knowledge of those animals that was passed to the humans is recorded. So that was the original treaty. The treaty between the humans and the animals. And then when other groups of humans came into Blackfoot territory and intended to stick around, they had to enter into that same treaty, right? They had to be brought into the fold. And so beaver bundles would be transferred to them. Like, a good example is the Tsuut'ina tribe. Some people know them as Sarsi, up by Calgary. You know, they haven't been in this area a long time. They're kind of a recent arrival, and you know, to stick around here in the good graces of Blackfoot people, they entered into the fold by taking on a beaver bundle, and being brought into that treaty. And they were never expected to, you know, change their language, which is a Dene language. But they were expected to learn the things that the animals had taught the people for how to live here, and take that kind of way of life in. And so they, you know, eventually were part of all of the different bundles in the complex, and they follow that same spiritual knowledge culture tradition as the Blackfoot, while speaking a different language and having a quite different history, you know. And other tribes did this as well, like the Mandan were here for a period. Blackfoot made treaty with them. Blackfoot made treaty with several tribes over the years, and this is what was part of it. When German Prince Maximilian came up the Missouri, I think it was in 1834, the Blackfoot transferred a beaver bundle to him. And I think, what they were doing was trying to make treaty, but they were the ones instigating in that case. But it was that Blackfoot kind of treaty. And they had a huge communications barrier because nobody spoke each other's language. So Prince Maximilian had no idea what really happened to him, what a key figure he could have been on behalf of his country in that instance. And, the Blackfoot did not get the ally that they expected out of that. But when they later made treaty with the United States government in 1855, and then Treaty 7 up here in Canada in 1877, the Blackfoot intention stayed the same. The idea was to bring the newcomers into the fold and teach them, the ways of life that had been developed and was still developing here. It was a long-term project, the Blackfoot way of life, and it was continuing to grow all the time. So the Blackfoot approach to the treaty was very much that we're going to take these guys in, because it happened like Treaty 7. Just the dynamics of it, that negotiation, the British Crown's treaty commission was surrounded by Blackfoot camps, and Tsutina and Stony, they were surrounded and way outnumbered, and there were thousands of Blackfoot warriors with rifles, with repeating rifles, who were like the otter at the beaver bundle ceremony and saying, why are we why are we hearing any demands from these guys, these new guys? Why don't we just kill them and be done with it? And it was the leadership of people like Red Crow and Crowfoot, the leaders of the time, who took on the role of the old beaver and says, no, we're not going to do that because there's a whole lot of these guys. They're going to learn about what we did if we kill them. We don't want that future where we're their enemy. Blackfoot had already had a big taste of that by 1877. U.S. Army had already massacred entire camp down on the Marias River, by 1870. So that wasn't the future people wanted. What they wanted was to embrace the newcomers, to coexist and learn how to live the way, the way that life had been here culturally, to bring them into that system. That was the Blackfoot idea, right? Not to surrender any land or any of this and that, So it's a shame, I think, that we don't explore that relationship and celebrate the relationship and try to improve on what it is when it's supposed to be the founding relationship of what's going on here politically today, right? It's the foundation. So if we want to have a strong foundation, we need to go back to look at that, to look at what happened there September 22nd, and try to start with some reconciliation from that point. Yeah, just walking back to the car, I was thinking it might be important to tag a little end note on here, because the way that I've portrayed the treaty and the Blackfoot understanding that the newcomers would be adopting Blackfoot ways of living is accurate. However, there was more to it than that, of course. Like the Blackfoot also understood that in exchange for being allowed to live here, the British Crown would be sharing technologies. Like I think at the signing of treaties, those technologies had to do with kind of ammunitions and maybe some agricultural basics, equipment, that kind of thing. But a sharing of technologies was the spirit behind it, right? You would share their technologies because the Blackfoot had been introduced to, they'd taken in several European technologies, from the horse to the rifle to the, blankets and fabrics and steel and all of this. They knew there were benefits to that technology if they were taken in and what would you call it? Kind of melded more with Blackfoot culture. If they were Blackfootized, those technologies, right? So, and key among those was the expectation that medicine as a technology would be shared, because there's talk in the treaty about a medicine chest, right? And that was very important because the newcomers brought with them terrible diseases, that would wipe out whole camps. So those medicines were very important, the promises of medicine. And the other thing was education. In that negotiations, that the Blackfoot understood there would be an educational component where they would have access to knowledge from that British Canadian tradition that would be of benefit, in the new globalizing world, basically, is what it's been coming down to. But that, the idea wasn't that education would be delivered as residential schools where children were stolen from parents and forcibly acculturated. That wasn't the expectation of that education idea that was in those negotiations. So there's a there's a lot that needs to be reconciled just in that treaty, as a starting point, and I don't know, I think at least a first step would be to have some kind of regional celebration of, recognition of, / discussion of that treaty.